Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to your Thursday morning. My name is Biniam. I'm a life recalibrator. You are listening to the Binge Checkin In podcast. As a life recalibrator, I like to focus on personal growth for myself. Hello, Brandon. Hello, Ollie. Good to see you guys coming in. Yes, self growth is a really important aspect of my life. And as I facilitated my life, I love helping others in their own context in the same way. So, life recalibrator, I, the royal we, I help others recalibrate past experiences that they may be like, "Ugh," and help them rewrite amazing new forecasts of what could be. The Bin Checking In podcast, which I do regularly every weekday morning, we focus on three key pillars. And these are ones that you guys, if you're listeners, already know. And if you know it, I'm really thrilled because that's a really helpful component and why I share this experience with you guys so that you have some tools in your arsenals to be able to help you a little bit forward in your experiential context. Those three pillars, of course, are awareness, kindness, and happiness. Awareness, let me break it down. Awareness in the sense of getting to know ourselves well and understanding what makes us us. Getting to be better acquainted with ourselves. You know how we get to know other people, and that's a lot of fun? This is the process of getting to know ourselves. I don't think a lot of us know ourselves as well as we could. And hence why we struggle through life in various scenarios. Have you ever thought, why do I always get ticked off when so and so does this? That's a good question of asking, who am I and why am I this way? And it's a really important investment, I believe. The kindness piece is in relation to how we can show ourselves kindness in the midst of change in life. See, every one of us is going through change. Every one of us is embracing some challenges along the way. There are things about ourselves that we're not too thrilled about because we wish we were already there. We wish we were already finished product. And we're not. We're all working our way forward. So how can we extend patience as we change? And then finally, happiness, learning to experience a deeper sense of happiness by processing all the uncomfortable emotions that come along the way. These are the various things that we like to focus on here on the Bin Checking In podcast. This is episode, listen, number 79. We're going to finish off this week on a round number of episode 80. That's tomorrow. I hope you'll be planning to join in. I know I have my regulars here who I am absolutely thrilled of. Thank you to my regulars who continue to listen in to our part of the original listening crew here. One of the things I'm always anticipating as I go through the various experiences I have in life is that I am aiming to make an impact. I'm aiming to make an impact, an investment in others. And that's a powerful thing because when you do so, they remember you for a very long time. I used to teach, and one of the things I did as a teacher was how can I connect with my students? How can I connect with them in a way that they're never going to forget our time together? When I was an Uber driver, same thing. How can I make an impact even in those few moments? I sometimes see my riders for only like 2, 3 minutes. And yet, in that very brief moments, how can I invest in them whereby it's going to be something that they're going to be thrilled about in reflecting on and remembering? And yeah, I have a gift that way, but I'm very intentional that way. And so I like to be able to make my investments count. And so one of the reasons why I spend time doing this podcast is to be able to help make an investment in you guys. Glad to see you, friends, coming in. I see you on TikTok, on Instagram, of course, and the YouTube. And this podcast does also get recorded onto my Spotify account under the same name as well. So, on the Bin Checking In podcast, what we like to do is focus on self reflecting questions. I look at the question, I analyze the question, I answer the question. I encourage you guys to do the same as well and be a part of this process. So, I'm so thrilled to have you guys joining in on this Thursday morning. As you can see, it's a little bit different from behind me. It's a sunny day here in Calgary, although I'm not anticipating it's very warm because it's getting into that time of year when things get a little more frigid. But I'm thrilled for it because it's nice to see the sun. We love the sun here in Calgary, and it just gives that sense of optimism, even though it is anything but. So, yes, glad to have you guys joining in. Welcome to the 78th episode of Ben Checking Podcast. This morning, the question we are answering is as follows. How do you feel about this past week, this past month, and this past year? How do you feel about this past season that we've come through? Now, this is a question in the present that is being reflected on by way of the past. Okay. So we're we're capturing how our feeling is at this present moment. This is a present moment self-reflecting question, but we are doing it in reference to what has come in our recent past here, of this past year, this past month, and this past week. It's kind of like, if you will, a check-in at this present moment in light of all that we have come through so far. Does that make sense? So this one here is going to be a bit more of a vulnerable podcast for me. This is one of the questions that I come across, like, I've got a list of questions that I'm working my way through here. Let me show you on my sheet here. So here's a few sheets of reflection questions. I put the dates and the episode number on the side here so that I know which ones I covered and when I covered them. And as I'm going through them, I'm like, ooh, I don't like that question. So I'm going to come back to that one later. And then as I run out of options, because I go through one per day here in each section, as I go through all the ones that I loved answering, I'm like, great, that was a lot of fun. Then I'm left with the ones that I'm not so thrilled about. And yet I'm committed to working through the questions. I'm like, I don't like this question because it's causing me to go into an area where I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel comfortable answering that question because it's a very vulnerable question, and I'm not so keen on perhaps going there. And yet, my commitment to myself, first and foremost, is that I'm going to work through these questions. I'm going to process them. I'm going to try and understand what it is I need to be learning. And it has turned out that these questions that I was not so thrilled about, they turn out to be questions that actually gave me a lot more insight into me. There's the awareness piece. I got to know myself a lot better by answering those questions that I was like, I don't want to go there. I don't want to like invest the work in trying to understand myself in this arena. It's an uncomfortable thing, isn't it, friends, to be able to look at yourself and ask yourself these questions saying, why do I do that? Or why is this valuable or important? Or whatever expression is that we're working our way through. It is an insightful thing to be able to see those questions and say, I don't like this. And then to be able to sit with that and say, well, why don't I like it? And what do I have to learn in the midst of like opportunity to go through it? So that's one such question we're answering today. Again, let me repeat the question and then I'll just kind of break it down a little bit. The question we're answering is, how do you feel about this past week? We're talking about feelings here. Ooh, already it's like, oh, feelings. Oh, sometimes, actually, a lot of times. I don't know if you're like me. Feelings can be uncomfortable, right? Feelings can be really difficult to sit with. So, this past week, this past month, this past year, what are our feelings at this present moment about what's been going on? I mean, it's a great question to answer if you are on cloud nine and everything's going well, and you're like, oh, yeah, like, let's move on with this. This is a great time, when everything's going well and you're like able to be in your element and you're just, yeah, you're in your zone. It's a great thing. However, when it's not the greatest time, when it's not the greatest season per se, it can be super challenging. It can be really difficult to be able to face those feelings and say, now how do I respond to this? Because this is not reflective of what I want to experience or enjoy or something along those ways. So, how do you feel about this past week, this past month, this past year? I guess when I was looking at this question, I wasn't thrilled about this question because I feel compelled, as a podcaster, I feel compelled to be aware of what I'm sharing with you guys. Now, I'm committed to sharing with you like the raw, honest truth of what's going on over here. I want to model what vulnerability looks like, especially from a guy's perspective, because I think that's an important thing that we as guys need to be doing a better job of is communicating feelings, communicating emotions, communicating how it is that we as guys could survive in this life by being human. And I think the current context is one that discourages that expression of vulnerability because we have to be looking tough. I reject that and I say, no, how can we reclaim masculinity in this arena of expressing vulnerability. So, how can we sit with our emotions and feelings? And that's what I was really wrestling with, looking at this opportunity for this question. I was thinking, I I don't know if I have great feelings about the season that I'm currently in. Why? Because there's a lot of challenges that I've been facing. There's a lot of stresses I've been sort of managing. There's a lot of challenges I'm in the midst of, and I don't know how it's going to turn out. So I'm in this zone here where this is a really uncomfortable question for me to embrace, and I'm going to feel really vulnerable. And I feel, in some sense, now here's me sharing with you a little bit about my answer already. But in some sense, I still struggle with that feeling of not being a loser, but one who is unsuccessful. I don't feel successful in life right now. There's just a lot of things like in the air right now that have yet to be determined to find out, is this really a great pathway that I've chosen to go on, or have I made a pretty big misjudgment in going on it? And so that's the season that I'm finding myself in. And so there is fears for sure that are present for me, that express himself in saying, "Oh, you're not looking very great right now. You're not looking very accomplished. You're not looking like you know what you're doing." You know what I mean? And so, yeah, it is not an easy season to be in. It is a challenging season for me. Challenging season to be able to say, "Ah, I wish I could show more than what I can currently show." Let me give you another analogy. I remember when I graduated from high school. It was a big deal, right? You guys remember when you graduated? For those of you who have graduated from high school, grade 12, you're like, hell yes. And you made commitments to your friends. You guys were like so optimistic about your future forecast. You're like, this is great. We're going to embrace the rest of our life now. We are going to go and accomplish something amazing out there in the world. And we're going to come back for our 10-year reunion, and we'll have conquered our field of career that we've chosen. We'll have made mincemeat out of our schedule, basically saying we'll have accomplished and we'll have something to show about it, right? And so we go off into the world, and then we realize and discover that the world is actually a tough place to live in. In fact, the guarantee is not that we're going to have success after success after success. No, um, it was rather something else. Something like, "Oh, crap, I made these plans and I was gonna have these goals accomplished by this time, but I just realized I'm gonna be out 5 years because I gotta deal with this unexpected thing along the way. And then, oh, crap, this came along and now I've gotta change my pathway here." And before long, we start seeing that life isn't happening on our schedule the way we wanted it to, and that we may have had to make some adjustments along the way. Sometimes, actually, oftentimes because of mistakes and decisions that we made along the way that kind of weren't the right ones. And so we feel like the sense of shame, and we feel the sense of not fulfilling on what we'd set out to do. And then we start thinking in terms of, I don't want to face my friends now because I feel like a failure. I set out with these grand ambitions and now I've got nothing to show for them. Can you guys relate? Because I know that's where I was for many years. That's part of that sense of feeling that I have when I come on a podcast. I'm like, I'm not sure if I'm really happy with my answers because it doesn't show me in a really competent way. But here, let me just be transparent with you guys. I don't have it together. I seem like I have it together a lot of times. There's some areas that I do amazing at, but what about the rest of life where, there's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of like, and so that's what I feel when I see a question like the one I'm answering today. How do you feel about this past week, this past month, this past year? Goodness, here I am at 40 plus years old, and I look at my accomplishments, and I'm tempted very strongly to think, I don't know if I have much to show for it. I've done a lot, I've accomplished a lot of things in life. I have some pretty stellar and amazing skill sets, and yet, um, if I were to be put in front of a crowd and they're like, "Hey, we're looking for you for wisdom. Tell us how to be successful in life." I'm like, I don't know if I know how that works in the accomplishment category, career wise or economic wise. I don't have much to show there. And that's where my vulnerability lies. That's where I'm feeling insecure. It's like, oh, I'm still trying to figure it out. I know how to do life really well in this social realm and how to communicate well, how to be able to establish boundaries and form amazing relationships and have fantastic conversations, which, by the way, There is a course I'm teaching next week. If you want to be a part of that course, life changing conversations, and I mean all of that, like conversations that change your life on an ongoing basis. I want you guys to go to my website, BennyMasters.com, and register for that because the deadline is this coming Sunday. Just a little plug in there. Of course, there's also a free resource of how I take small talk and translate it into epic conversations in a free resource I have called Stop Starving on Small Talk. So check that out on BennyMasters.com. I'd love for you guys to have access to those resources. But I know where I do really well. I know what my skill set is, and so I can talk a lot about that. But when it comes to how do I feel about just life in general, like coming to this place so far, you know how you're very aware of your shortcomings. We're so aware of those, aren't we, guys? We're so aware of here's where I wish I was, but I'm not. Here's what I wish I'd accomplished, but here's where I'm still at right now. Here's what I wanted to tell everyone and what I announced, and here's where I'm at, lacking anything to show. And so we kind of walk away with our tail between our legs, and we kind of feel that way, right? You're doing an amazing job, bro. Keep up the good work. Thank you for the encouragement, friends. I so appreciate it. I see your comments there in the chat. So that's why I have this sense of dread when it comes to these kind of questions because I still buy into, and I'm trying to work on this in my own mental space here. Here's how I'm being aware of what's going on in my mind and saying, okay, I observe that. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? And as I consider if it's something I want to keep on going or changing, I'm also trying to extend kindness to myself, saying, okay, let me not beat myself up about this. So, in reference to like my sense of insecurity, I would express kindness, saying, okay, it's all right. It's normal for me to feel sort of off on this one here. And so, thank you, Brandon. I appreciate your encouragements. How do I proceed with acknowledgement and saying, okay, I see what's going on there, and I'm going to work through it. I'm not going to beat myself down and say, oh, you're just so hopeless, Benny. Like, you just can't get it together. No, I'm not going to go there. Instead, I'm going to go into another realm of saying, Benyam, let's work on this together. There's still a way that you can proceed forward. And what would that look like for you? So that can be a tough thing. I was just kind of sitting there for a moment and thinking, that is an uncomfortable thing to sit and be willing to face those things that you're scared to face. I know what it's like because when I see those, um, it definitely does stir those emotions of discomfort, right? And uncertainty. So let me get to the answer about this past week, this past month, this past year. Thanks for sitting through these emotions with me. Now, I get emotional, yes, as you're probably seeing on the recording or on the video part. I get emotional, and I'm unapologetic about being emotional. Why is that? Because this is life. This is life, and I was just sharing with a friend here in text form how one of the commitments I have as a guy is as a guy, I have a commitment to reject certain expectations. I have a commitment to rejecting certain expectations or presumptions of what guys can do or not do. And one of those things is we're discouraged from being emotional. And I'm like, no, hell no. I think it's healthy for us to express emotion. I think it's really important for us to be able to say, hey, I'm not doing so well right now, or I don't know what this looks like, or this is kind of a scary zone. Instead of having to feel compelled to always say, show the tough side and, we'll proceed forward. So thank you for sitting through the emotions with me because they can be discomforting for others when they're like, oh no, someone's emotional. I'm going to check out now kind of thing because we're generally uncomfortable around those expressions. Whereas I say, hey, let's make space for it. Let's make space for it and sit through it. This is one of the best things we can do for those in our lives who are in the midst of emotional seasons is to be able to affirm them and say, hey, you're good. Express those. I'm sitting here with you. I'm with you in that moment, right? I wish I can cry. Ever since I got hit by the SUV, I haven't been able to cry. Man, Brandon, I hear you. That's a tough thing. You've got a really amazing story. And yet I see that there's some I guess outcomes from that are still adverse, eh? It is a fantastic expression to be able to have access to, because it kind of shows what's on the inside, right? In a really healthy way to say, hey, here's how I'm processing and going forward in this certain um, zone that I'm presently experiencing. And not having access to that must be really challenging. So thanks for sharing that. So, yeah, let me dive into my response to today's question. Again, for you, those of you coming in, the question I'm asking is, how do you feel about this past week, month, and year? I was just saying how I felt uncomfortable answering this question because it hasn't been so great. It hasn't been so great, and sometimes I feel or I buy into that sense that I don't want to share like negative parts or responses of what I'm going through with others, because I mean that's kind of a drag, you know. But no, no, no. I'm going to say this is life. This is life. Here's how we embrace life. Here's how we go through life intentionally and saying, this is worthwhile. We're going to face it. We're going to walk through it. We're going to experience it. And that's important. So for me, let's start off with this past year. This past year is probably the easier part to answer because I would say this past year, we're nearing the end of the year. We globally have been in the midst of a pandemic that has brought tremendous stress and uncertainty and pressure on the majority of our race. Majority of humans have felt the pressure. We felt like the weight of this pandemic on our health, and certain ways that we have to go about living life now that restrict what we once probably had access to. That's a stressful thing to watch. Now, I've been able to sense the stress and the pressure on society at large just because I'm out there amongst people and I'm hearing from them and I'm experiencing what they're going through and so on. And so I've had access to that. And as I've had access to it, as an empath, I feel in a certain way, right? I feel for them. And so there's a certain bit that I accept into my space and saying, okay, I see that, I acknowledge it, and I understand that that's a challenging thing for a lot of people. And yet I'm able to manage that. I'm able to manage it. I'm able to watch it. I'm able to be in the midst of like that kind of a societal pressure point and not have it affect me. Why? Because I think the strength that I bring to the table is one where I encourage others and I remind them of what's important. I've got this gift to be able to connect with people. And as I connect with people, I'm able to like speak into their circumstances and I'm able to remind them saying, hey, it's not game over. And I'm able to see them in their specific, like they know I understand where they're at because I'm able to say, is this what you're feeling? Is this what you're experiencing? Is this where you're presently at? And they're like, hell yes, that's it. You understand me. I'm like, great, I understand you. Now, let me give you some encouragement. You don't have to stay here. Alex, good to see you, my friend. You don't have to stay in the midst of whatever it is here. And then I'm gifted in the ability of describing the alternative of what could be. I'm gifted in the ability of saying, hey, there's other options at play here that you have access to. And so, all this to say, I think I have that gift. And so, even as I've been in the midst of society at large and in general, experiencing all these uncertainties, yet I've also been able to extend hope. I've been able to extend awareness and encouragement and camaraderie and hope. Like the big one is hope for me. I'm able to communicate that. And so, I think I'm encouraged when I think of the past year and what I've been able to accomplish, people I've been able to meet, the way I've been able to inspire and encourage them. What's the topic, Charlie? It is how do you feel about this past week, this past month, this past year? So I've been saying in reference to my past year, I feel, somewhat confident and accomplished that I've been able to make it through this whole pandemic and encourage others. Now, how do I feel about this past month? Oh, now it's getting a little more serious. Just over a month ago, I made the decision to stop driving for Uber, not like permanently, but indefinitely until I can come back to it again. Why? Because I wanted to focus in and hone in on my business that I've been working on. I said, I'm going to put a stop there. I'm going to take a whole month and just go hard on my business and get that jump started and going. So that was a big risk because that means there's no income coming in. I'm kind of like working off the reserves now. And oh, this is a uncertain sort of I felt compelled to make that decision because I'm like, hey, I definitely, I'm ambitious. I want to see things accomplished in my life. I want to move forward, and so that's kind of what I'm committed to in the way I engage with things that I'm all in kind of thing is what I'm trying to say. When I'm in the midst of relationships or friendships, I'm all in, and when I'm doing things like my online thing now, I'm all in kind of thing because I know what I'm trying to accomplish. But when I was seeing that I couldn't quite facilitate doing Uber and my business and give them both the time they needed, I said, let me pause Uber because this is the one that I want to focus on for the rest of my life. And I'll still do Uber kind of like on the sidelines. So I said, let me just put a stop there. That was a risky thing. And I had no confirmation that this was actually going to be a hit, that this was actually going to be successful. And so, with that absence of certainty that it's going to work, I made that decision, and it was scary. I'm still in the midst of that. So I'm feeling extremely uncertain right now about that decision. It could go really well or it could be a big flop. And if it's a big flop, I'll feel very, this is an uncomfortable word. I'll feel like a failure, basically. I'll feel like a failure is how I guess there's that fear element, right? In what I've sort of designed. And this is kind of the zone that I walk in. This is the zone that I play in because that's just kind of how my temperament and my makeup is. So, in reference to my past month, I felt very uncertain, and even this past week, even more pressure there. Just because I'm coming to the end, I've been learning a lot along the way, but I don't have a lot to show for. And so there's that encroaching feeling on the horizon that says, "Oh, Baniam, you're really not. You're not." There's not much to show. I've done a lot of work, but there's not a lot to show for it. Does that make sense? And at the end of it all, if there's not a lot to show, um, I, it, I'll definitely feel some feelings of incompetence, of not being able to like accomplish what I set out to do. And so there's definitely that. Whew, guys, that was really difficult for me. This is like probably one of the most vulnerable. Hmm, This is one of the most vulnerable podcasts I've done so far, and it's saying something because I'm at a podcast episode number 78 here, right? And yeah, this is like I've shared so much from strength and encouragement and hope because I've covered all the questions that I love. But this question today is one of the ones that's kind of forcing me into the corner and saying, "Are you accountable to this expression here that he needs to face and attend to?" And so I guess that's part of what I'm committed to on this podcast is sharing with you and modeling for you what it looks like to go through the uncomfortable parts. And this kind of touches into the awareness piece. I'm aware of what's going on. The kindness, how can I be kind to myself in the midst of this season, not beating myself up, and then finally the happiness piece. And the happiness piece is, hey, how can you also work your way towards happiness? Right now, it may be uncertain, and I'm not really in that happy zone of saying, I'm happy because I succeeded. No, I can't say that quite yet. But this is me sitting in the midst of that discomfort and saying, it's all right. It does not reflect on my worth as a person. My accomplishments are so far removed from who I am as a person. I'm reminding myself that by way of kindness and saying whether I'm successful or not in my business endeavors, that wasn't the point. I'm still very much worthwhile. And I'll just pivot again and say, where am I shifting into next? And what am I learning as I go along the way? Friends, that probably wasn't easy to sit through. But I'm thankful for you sitting through these uncomfortable emotions with me. This is the important part I feel in the way that we engage in life. This is the part that we're missing critically to be able to connect with others in meaningful ways and say, here's how I'm trying to figure my way out. I don't have it all together. And yet, in the midst of figuring things out, we share hope with each other, encouragement along the way, and I hear from you guys. Thank you. I hope to see you guys tomorrow. Tomorrow is episode number 80. 80. Holy crap. We've made it this far, and that is stellar and amazing. This podcast has become very important to me, personally, first and foremost, but also because you, my small motley crew of followers right now who are following along and participating, are building something significant here. I have no doubts that this is going to be huge one day, that there's going to be like a huge influx of people who are finding this content really impacting. It just hasn't been discovered yet. It hasn't been put out there yet. And yet here you guys are, my dear friends, at the outset, building something meaningful with me, sharing with me and saying, hey, it's worth it to live life on purpose. This is a phrase I keep on saying regularly now. I want to live life on purpose, and I want to encourage and invite you guys to live with me life on purpose. Thank you, my dear Salam. So that's why I very much appreciate the time that you're spending and sitting through and reflecting with me. I hope I'll see you tomorrow on episode number 80. Love you guys.